Question 12. Question 12 in our catechism. Continues with the subject of providence. What special act of providence did God exercise towards man in the state wherein he was created? So we go from the general doctrine of providence, which is in question 11, to the specific issue of providence regarding mankind, or regarding man in the original creation. And the answer: when God created man, he entered into a covenant of life, or as some refer to it, the covenant of works, a covenant of life with him upon condition of perfect obedience, forbidding him to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil upon pain of death. This covenant of life that God entered into with man is implicit in the book of Genesis. We have there, and we'll read it in a few minutes, Genesis 2 verse 17. It's proven more specifically in Romans 10. If you look at Romans 10 and verse 5. Romans 10 and verse 5. For Moses describeth the righteousness which is of the law, that the man which doeth those things shall live by them. And the principle obviously refers not only to the Mosaic law, but refers to that law that God gave to Adam. One law, one command. And if Adam had have kept that command, he would have lived. Also back in Romans 5 and verse 12 and 14. Romans 5 verse 12. Wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. So the covenant of life also had on the other side to it that the opposite, which is death. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. And also verse 14. Nevertheless death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the similitude or likeness of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. We probably should have read verse 13 as well. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed, or sin is not counted when there is no law. That doesn't mean that sin didn't exist. It just means that sin wasn't literally reckoned in the normal manner, but people were still sinners by nature and by action, and that is why they died. So back in our catechism question, when God had created man, he entered into a covenant of life with him upon condition of perfect obedience. As one commentator says, that if Adam and Eve had have obeyed, they would have lived, and eventually most would agree they would have not only received eternal life and given the right to eat of the tree of life, but would ultimately have been brought into the glory of heaven. That is the covenant of life, or if you like, the covenant of works. It goes on to say, forbidding him to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is the actual covenant, if you like. This is the one command, forbidding him to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil upon pain of death. Genesis 2:17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Johannes Voss, in his commentary on the larger catechism, asks the question, a sub-question 12. He asks, why did God command Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? This was a sheer arbitrary test. Now, I disagree with the word arbitrary there, and nothing that God does is arbitrary. But he says this was a sheer test of obedience to the will of God. The fruit of the tree was good in itself. It was not poisonous or harmful in itself. The only reason why Adam and Eve were not to eat it was just because God had said, "Thou shalt not eat of it." So it was a pure test of obedience to God's will. And back in Romans 5 we see that Adam failed that test, but Christ succeeded. Some people are against. We won't be looking at that passage, which is a pity in one sense because of the context of our catechism. I felt a measure of guilt this evening in preparing the catechism that I wasn't ready to preach on this passage because of this, because so often the catechism question and the message do fit in together, and they would have literally fitted in together this evening if that was the case. But some people are against this idea of the federal headship of Adam, and that's what really it's referred to. That's what it is. Adam was our federal head. So when Adam disobeyed, we all disobeyed in him. But what's wonderful on the other side of that is that Christ also being our federal head, when he succeeded or when he passed the test, we are regarded as succeeding in him, just as truly as we were regarded as failing in Adam. He goes on to say, and I'll finish with this: those who reject the covenant or the doctrine of the covenant of works have no right to claim the blessings of the covenant of grace, for the two are parallel and stand or fall together, as is proved by Romans 5. If we don't establish the covenant of works or the covenant of life, we can have no confidence in the covenant of grace. So what special act of providence did God exercise towards man in the state wherein he was created? When God had created man, he entered into a covenant of life with him upon condition of perfect obedience, forbidding him to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil upon pain of death. Well, let us begin our service of worship this evening.